Hello everybody, and thank you for watching this tutorial on how to do a painted cupcake in acrylic paints. We'll only be working in A4, but you're going to need a variety of brushes, from your wide brush for gessoing and then your 1/2 inch down to your small round brush from your kits. Preparing our ground. Whenever we do a painting, we always use gesso to prepare our surface, and we do a colour wash. So using your large brush, you're going to do a crisscross pattern in your book or on whatever surface you're planning on doing your painting on. This doesn't need to be really thick, it's just a thin layer to provide a barrier between your acrylic paints and whatever surface you're painting on. I'm going to do a cool grey wash on mine, so I'm using cool blue, black and white. My gesso isn't quite dry, so it is still blending in with that, and I'm just using a wet cloth and the smallest amount of paint to very roughly stain my background a colour, so it's not plain white that I'm working on. We're going to start by drawing a subject, in this case it's a cupcake, and I'm using kind of like a violet brown, so I've mixed warm red, cool blue and just watered that down so it's really watery, and I'm just using that to mark out my cupcake exactly the same as what we did with our oil pastels. So I've started with a shape down the bottom, so a trapezoid, an ellipse on top of that. I've then drawn in my frosting shapes and then drawn in the cupcake case, and just ensuring that I've got those lines working down from those angles all the way down. Remember, they're on a slight angle, they don't go straight down. It's important at this point to get your drawing looking pretty good and where you want it to be, so make sure it's not lopsided. And then once again, what we're going to be doing is looking at where is our light source coming from, and then blocking in our shadows, and I'm using that same color that I used to do my drawing. So it's just like it's kind of like a warm gray, I guess, more so than a brown or a slightly violet color. So I'm just adding my shadows to the left hand side of all of my objects, including my cupcake case, and we'll refine these more as we go on. So remember, this is just a rough start to block in where those dark areas are. So we're now going to work on the background, and I'm going to actually mix my colours on my page. Rather than just having a flat orange, I want to have a variety of oranges on my background. So I'm using a warm red, a cool yellow, and I'll also add some white into areas. So I'm just going around and roughly blocking in my background, picking up bits of my yellow, picking up bits of my red, and mixing them together on my page. So you can see my brush strokes are backwards and forwards in crisscross formats, covering all of the pages. And I'm just paying attention to those edges, but because I'm painting my cupcake later, I don't have to be super neat. So I'm looking more at having more yellow on the right hand side and a bit more red on the left hand side, and just mixing some white into some areas, which is where my light's coming from as well. So depending upon how smooth you want it to be, you can wet your brush down and smooth those colors and blend them in more, or you can keep it quite rough. Okay, so now we're going to work in the cake part. This is just a very small section. Again, we're blending from light to dark, and because I've got that dark color underneath there to start with, it's already added my shadow in. Now I'm using a warm yellow for this. If you've got yellow oxide or yellow ochre, that will be a really good color for a cupcake. I didn't, so I've just mixed a warm yellow with a touch of red and a little bit to make a little bit of brown on the side there, just to bring that shadow back in. I've got white on the right hand side where my highlight is, and you'll see me continue to work that in. I'm now just going to strengthen up the shadows, particularly of the icing and also of the cupcake case as well, just in preparation of the next layer of colour that's going to come on top of this. You'll remember from our oil pastel that for our shadows we actually use a cool blue. So this is in the style of Wayne Thiebaud. So once again, I'm going to use a cool blue to add my shadow in on my tabletop, and I'll also then go over my shadow areas with that cool blue. And when we do our tabletop, we're just going to go straight over the top of that, the same with our cupcake case. So cool blue will form our base color for our shadows. So we're now going to do our tabletop. This time I'm going to do it a light green. So I have mixed the green on my palette. So I've used a cool yellow and a cool blue, and I want it quite pale. So I'll actually be mixing that with white on my page. So I've made my lighter green and then using that and white on my page to do my tabletop. So once again, my brush strokes are kind of backwards and forwards because I still do want to have that texture of different colors shining through. And I'm just paying attention around my edges, and when I get to my shadow, I'm going to paint straight over my shadow as well, which you'll see in a minute. I'm doing a slightly darker blue on the darker green on this side. Now you'll see here that my orange background isn't actually dry, so there's a little bit of orange being picked up, which I just have to be very careful of that it doesn't go brown. Luckily enough, it was just the smallest amount on my brush still. So you can see here I'm about to go over my shadow, and what that means is because I've done that shadow underneath, it looks like it's blended straight into the tabletop. If I was to do that shadow on top, sometimes it looks like it doesn't blend in well enough. So doing your shadow first and then doing your table over the top is a better way to go. Just continue to build up your colors. You can have it as smooth and as blended as you like, or as rough as you like. I also do recommend that you try and keep your brush strokes on your tabletop horizontal because your tabletop is flat. So always use your brush strokes in the directions of the objects that you're going, and just paying attention to those edges where you can. Okay, let's get working on our cupcake case. Now you'll want to spend a little bit of extra time on your case because this is where it starts to really look 3D. So I'm using a light blue. I'm using a warm blue this time because I've used cool blue across the rest, and it kind of gives me that slight mauvey purpley look. So I'm using my flat brush, and you can see I'm using it on an angle to get that top edge of the case in, so that diagonal stroke down, and then I'm using it vertically just to get the thin lines going down, and then I'm painting over the top of those shadow areas once again to blend those shadows into the whole piece overall. So I will just continue through going through this, paying attention to those strokes. You'll see most of my strokes are going straight up and down, and towards the bottom I'm just adding a bit more warm blue and doing my strokes kind of flicking upwards just to show that they would be shadow towards the bottom of that cupcake case. And I'll also work in the lines of those cupcake cases as we go through as well to show that it's that pleated kind of look of the cupcake. So I'm just going to continue through adding some warm blues into my shadows, and continuing adding whites into my highlights and focusing on those lines and those shapes of that concertina look of my cupcake case. Okay, so I'm changing my brush here to my small round one because I need a little bit more finer details, and I'm just focusing on the edges and a bit of darker warm blue down towards that bottom of my case. And I'm also going to use my small round brush just to add the top edges of the cupcake case as well, where the shadow parts are. So just doing a quick flick line with those left hand vertical parts that are there, and also to add some emphasis to the creases within my case. I'll now go back in with the white and do the opposite side. So I focused on the shadow details. I'll now focus on the highlight part of the creases of the case and add some lighter blue. So again, this is just the warm blue with more white added into it. And again, just using the strokes to emphasize the creases that are occurring in the cupcake case. Okay, time for our frosting. So this is the last kind of section that we have to paint. So this time I'm using cool red, white, and I'm be using a warm blue as well for the shadows. But the shadows that I've already got on there are still a little bit damp, so they actually blend nicely into my paint as I'm working through as well. So again, I'm paying attention to the shape of each of those swirls of cupcake icing. So at the moment, I'm using a flat brush and I'm working in kind of like I guess a U shape, a very flattened U shape to get that in. And I'm looking at light and value. So I've got my whiter areas on my right hand side and my darker areas on my left hand side, which are occurring naturally. I'm now bringing some more white into my right hand side to lighten it up, and again focusing on how I can create that difference between the three sections of my icing. And you can see my strokes have changed. I'm now sort of going downwards in a curve, so a backwards C, to indicate that that icing is rounded and almost fluffy. So I'll just continue working through, paying attention to my shadows underneath each of the swirls of icing and the highlights on the left hand side and the top edges of it. And so just keep working backwards and forwards with your lights and darks to get those shadows and the highlights and the brightness of the color happening as well. So you can see my strokes here again have changed. I'm now dabbing my light areas on, and this is to kind of show that the icing is light and fluffy, so it's a textural quality that we're adding into it as well, and this also emphasizes the highlights. I'm now just going in and tidying up as well the edges of my cupcakes, so these are all the kind of final details and emphasizing where the highlights and the shadows are on the pieces. So just go through and be critical and add highlights where you need to show the highlights there. Add some more shadows into some areas if you need to, and just emphasize some edges. Remember, this is an expressive painting as well, so we're not looking for nice smooth strokes, and you'll see towards the end when I do a close-up video how textural and layered the paint actually is. Okay, so the finished item there, you can see the strokes are quite rough, there's texture, there's layers. Don't forget to put your signature on it, and we're going to watch a short video just here where I'll zoom in and you can see just how textured the painting is, how rough areas are, and also the different layers that happen. Remember, you're grabbing attention from a distance when someone sees this, and you're drawing them in, the viewer in, to see that textural quality of the paint that you're using. Have a go, can't wait to see what you produce.